issues there, that kind of discomfort, that feeling uncomfortable, is such a core word in my whole story and narrative around resilience, because that is where resilience comes from. It is being uncomfortable. Insecurities, your fears, your doubts, your worries, what are they? Why are they there? Have you ever actually kind of gone into them? The quitting the job is the easiest part. The day you actually hand your notice in, it's everything else that comes with it and before it. But there's all these other questions that you've got to consider. It becomes a little bit of like, and because of this, I will never be okay again. If you tell yourself that, then that's going to become your reality.
Look at the small wins you had. So there's nothing stopping you doing that again.
What is it that I know that I need to do that's going to help me grow and to become a better version of myself? And yeah, there are times it's going to not be that enjoyable and you're not going to really want to do it.
That doesn't align with what I want to do, so I'm not going to do it.
Okay, am I doing something because it's probably for the best versus I really don't want to be here, I don't want to be doing this, I don't want to see that person or whatever it is?
I must admit, that must be quite a hard skill to develop as well.
Once I have a bit of money, then I'll be happy. And I'm like, no.
Welcome back to the Not Quite Pod. Today we've got Will with us. Will, do you just quickly want to introduce yourself and let everyone know a bit about yourself?
So my name is Will Middleton. I am a mental resilience coach and I work with clients all over the world, helping them to deal with everything from their pasts and things that they may have gone through that may have been very traumatic, all the way through to creating better versions of themselves and allowing them to live happier and better lives.
Awesome. I'm really looking forward to diving into this, because we were just saying before we started recording that I've never heard of a resilience coach. So I'm really looking forward to sort of diving into how this all works and how it all came about. So what made you start doing what you do now?
Yeah, so my journey's been an interesting one. Mental health has always been something that I've been quite good at looking after and extending that physical and emotional health as well. Ever since I was a kid, I was always really interested in that ability to be able to kind of really be in tune with how I was feeling. And that then extended into this idea of mental resilience and pushing myself in different aspects of life. It became kind of even more important when I started doing my own thing, when I ran my own business, because, as we know, there's a lot of what comes with running a business. There's a lot of stress, burnout, anxiety, and all the rest of it. So I knew that I had to make a promise to myself to always prioritize myself and my mental health before anything else. And after doing it for a while and starting to post about it a little bit online, I realized that people wanted to get in on it and they wanted to know, well, how do I get better at dealing with my own, mental struggles and improving my mental resilience? Because, at the end of the day, that's kind of what really matters.
I mean, it's really interesting as well, particularly you touched on there that obviously a lot of the journey started particularly for you developing your own company and going through that journey. What do you think of where society's at with hustle culture, entrepreneurship, and looking after people's mental health? Because it's something that I've battled with myself, because you always want to keep pushing and pushing and pushing, but then sometimes we forget to look after ourselves. So what have you seen from the work that you do and the experiences you've had yourself of what's your opinion on the dynamic that we're seeing today?
Yeah, so I think that phrase you used, hustle culture, I think particularly now with so much more awareness of being able to see into people's lives, and it sounds like there's more entrepreneurs than ever and everyone's wanting to kind of get on the bandwagon, but I think what people forget is it's a huge thing to kind of take on. And with society starting to encourage people to take advantage of the fact that it's a lot easier now to quit your job and find a new thing and follow your passions and stuff, that can be really healthy and really good, because it allows people to follow their dreams. But it also has its the other side of it, which is everything that comes with it, because it's not an easy journey. And I think so it's really important not to sort of be too directed by society's opinions about what you should or shouldn't be doing. And I guess that's a bit of a problem with, it's a double-edged sword, particularly with social media, is you've got so much information out there, but actually you've got to kind of trust yourself and you've got to sit with it and really kind of over time build on it and learn what it is you want to do, because not everyone wants to do the hustle culture and wants to be an entrepreneur. And some people are very happy in their 9-to-5s and just kind of taking life quite easy. And so everyone's very different. So it's about finding what works for you, I think.
What about when it comes to obviously a lot of your work is based around resilience, and you touched on there jumping from a lot of people now move around jobs a lot more. But then oftentimes I've seen with friends is they've stayed in jobs that aren't necessarily the best for their mental health, but they're in a constant cycle of, I need it to pay the bills. I need it to, what society's view going to be of me if I just quit? What, like, how have you seen that dynamic play out with clients? And I'm that's an assumption. You may not have dealt with it. You may have not seen it before, but what have you dealt with it and how do you approach that? Because I think, like you say, we often get caught up in society's expectation rather than zooming out and going, no, what's right for me rather than what's right for the outside world and the way they're going to view me.
Yeah, so I have. It's quite a common issue that clients come to me with is this, I'm in this job, I don't really like it, but I can't quit because I've got bills to pay. Now what? And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people want a quick fix. They think, well, if it's not going to be a quick fix, then I'm not even going to go there because I can't just quit my job. And you sort of have to respond saying, well, it's not about quitting your job tomorrow. It's about having a longer term plan to work out, if I did quit my job, what does that look like? If I give myself a 12-month kind of countdown. And what I work with clients is to kind of build up that timeline, because it's a slow moving train. Things don't happen overnight. And quitting a job is just like the end point. And actually and this was for me, the quitting the job is the easiest part. The day you actually hand your notice in, it's everything else that comes with it and before it. Where am I going to after? Is that going to be right for me? Am I going to, am I going to be making as much money? So there's all these other questions that you've got to consider. And it's really important, as you said, to just test the waters and to understand, well, what is it I want to do? And the only way we can do that is by shutting off the external world and coming back into, what are my passions? What are my interests? What am I good at? And, we hear of that ikigai, the sort of, what can I do well? What can I get paid for? What do people want from me? And there is a lot there, but I don't believe in the attitude of like, oh, well, I can't quit my job because I've got bills to pay, because a lot of people have done it. And yeah, it's taken maybe 5 years sometimes or whatever, but it is doable. Like it's not a kind of impossible task. It just, you need to put the time and the effort in.
What would you say? Because I think that's another thing you see a lot of, and I myself have battled with that of like, what can I do? What am I good at? And I think that's a constant thing is we always struggle to see what ourselves as individuals are good at, but we can easily point to others and go, oh, they're really good at this, they're really good at that, they should go and do this would be an ideal career for them. A lot of the time you'll sit there and go, oh, what the hell I'm doing? I just do. And that's, I think, a lot of the situation that a lot of people are in. What advice would you give for someone to help them understand another avenue they could go down, particularly in their career?
Yeah, I mean, that statement, what the hell am I doing? That's so true. Even for people who potentially who look like they know what they're doing on the outside, this whole kind of imposter syndrome, and from people right at the top of their game, it still goes on a day-to-day basis. I've listened to enough podcasts and met enough people that say that, who are 20 years into their careers. So I think it's accepting that. It's accepting that we don't really know what we're doing a lot of the time, and that's okay. And that because of that, you can play around quite a lot with it, and you can sort of think, well, look, I'm not going to start knowing everything. And so I've just got to start somewhere, and I've got to be willing to slip up. I've got to be willing to fail. I've got to be willing to get it wrong. But the more I do that, the closer I'll get to understanding what it is I am good at and what it is I like. And as you said, it's very easy for us to look at our friends and people around us and say, oh, you're really good at that. And how often do we sit with ourselves and think, well, wait a minute, what actually are my personality traits that like help me be good at what I do? What are the characteristics that I can bring? And sort of literally with like a pen and paper or whatever it is, we're so reluctant to sit down with ourselves and really almost like self-analyze, because it's quite a scary, strange thing to do. But you should be able to answer it as quickly as you answer the question, how are you? You should be able to answer, what are you good at? What do you like? Pretty sort of bang, 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 bang. But I think a lot of us don't, because we've never actually spent the time doing that.
It's really tricky. I think it's that whole thing of like, you get too caught up in your own head, and you get like your anxiety starts talking of like, you're not good at anything. And that's something I think a lot of people battle with, the whole, what am I good at? And what is an actual, because I think as well, a lot of us go down the route of like, a lot of the time they feel like, oh, but everyone's good at that. Like you might say, oh, I'm a good communicator. Oh, everyone's a good communicator. And then you end up in that cycle of what is a specific thing that I'm good at. So obviously we've talked a lot about the work that some of the questions that come up in the work that you do. What does a typical session look like when you start working with a client? What are those beginning phases? What do you start looking at?
Yeah, so my work with clients is kind of split into two. So you either kind of go down a more intense 6-session program with me, or it's more of an ongoing thing. And the way that I decide that is if they're sort of dealing with something from their past where we need a lot of time to kind of get through that before they then move on to the more intense kind of forward-looking coaching style. And the session, I'll use an example of, I find out what their present reality is, or what are they struggling with, where are their, what is the main problem, where they want to get to, and how we're going to get there. And then kind of in one of the early sessions, my philosophy is I want to break them down and build them back up again. So that's the kind of goal, because what I'm trying to do is clear all the noise away, focus on you, and understand everything that's going on in your head and in your life so that you can become the most kind of authentic version of yourself, and to have a much clearer idea of what it is that you're going to do going forward to make the life you want to live. And so that might, one of the sessions we do focuses on things like your insecurities, your fears, your doubts, your worries. What are they? Why are they there? Have you ever actually kind of gone into them? Because fear is a really interesting kind of thing in our lives, because it's just a cover up for what's actually underneath. And I always like to go deeper and deeper and deeper. It's like, what's the root cause of this? I fear that I fear that I'm going to have a boring career for the rest of my life. Okay, well, what's the fear there? Oh, well, it's actually because, my parents had that kind of career and I never really aspired to be like that. Okay, well, what's stopping you from doing it? Well, I don't really think I'm good at anything. And it's like, is that true? Do you know for a fact you are not good at anything? Everyone's good at something.
Yeah.
And you keep digging and you dig until you get right to the kind of core of it, of like, what is stopping me from releasing that potential inside me? Because everyone has incredible potential in them. It's just about accessing it. And as you said earlier, it's that you need to be able to control what I call the egoic mind. Because although people think ego is about, oh, I'm amazing and being arrogant, it's also I'm worthless, I'm terrible, I'm not good at anything. Yeah. It's both sides, and you need to be able to respond to it and say, well, no, that's not true. Like, I am good at things, but even if I don't know what they are yet, great, that's step one. You don't know. That's step two. Let's figure it out. Yeah. And so, but you've got to get rid of a lot of the noise and the emotions and the societal expectations and conversations that you've had with people, and kind of, that's what we would work on throughout the sessions, is like, who are you and who do you want to be?
How have you broken down that with clients? Because particularly, it's growing and it's getting better. People talking about their mental health and what they're struggling with, particularly when it comes to professional life. But how do you deal with clients that they've come to you in kind of a, right, I need to do something, so I press the button and now I'm here, but now I don't really feel comfortable with what we're doing. And how do you guide them through that process? Because it's obviously, I think any time we talk of resilience and mental health, it's a very vulnerable position to be in. How do you guide someone through that might not be as open to having the discussion? Or, see, they're there in front of you, so they've taken the first step, but they might be then thinking, oh my God, what the hell am I doing here? I shouldn't have done this, and try to back out. So how do you deal with that with clients?
Yeah, so my number one kind of entrance into it is to make sure that the space they're in, i.e. the time that we have together, is like an entirely sort of safe space where they can share whatever they want with me. So I allow them to feel as comfortable as possible, and to know that I'm on their side and I'm here to help them in any way I can. And we always have an initial kind of consultation call to, for them to see that and to know that they can come here and be vulnerable and it'd be okay. And that kind of, and I bring in a lot of my counseling skills there. And with that, even if they turn up and they sort of do think, oh, I'm not sure this is right for me, or I'm a bit nervous or whatever, that's okay, because that's part of it. And if anything, it's me telling them it's okay to be nervous. It's that acceptance of it. And that word you use there, that kind of discomfort, that feeling uncomfortable, is such a core word in my whole story and narrative around resilience, because that is where resilience comes from. It is being uncomfortable. And although it pushes you back and maybe knocks you down, it's that ability to not shy away from it, but to lean into it and to know that this process is uncomfortable.
How do you balance, because obviously we've spoken quite a bit about resilience. How do you balance, because I think there's a fine line with resilience of having the right amount of it and then just put up with the untold amount of shit and you'll be fine. You just need to push through it. How do you find that balance with clients? Because resilience is such a powerful thing, but it definitely has a point where you shouldn't really go past this because this is good, this is bad. That's how I see it. Of like, I've seen so many friends go through like, oh, but I just need to push through, and it's like, but at what cost are you pushing through that? How do you balance that with clients? Because I think, particularly myself included, I'm one of those people like if I'm in, I'm all in. So if you say to me, I need to be more resilient, I'm going to 200 when really I probably need to be back towards 80, 70%. How do you balance that?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And you're right. It's like, when is it too much? And I think there's a difference is having boundaries within your own kind of life, but also knowing when it's right for you to push through. So I do think it's partly from experience. Like, you'll know when there's times when it's right to push and when it's not. I think we can normally push more than we realize, but I think it becomes a bit of a risk or a problem when it's at the detriment to something else. So if you're looking at trying to kind of push through something, for example, if someone was starting a business and it got to the point where they're just maxed out, they're so stressed, they're burning out, their mental health is impacted, but they just keep thinking, oh, but like the business is so nearly there, like we're nearly on 6 figures or whatever it is, just need to put a few more weeks in. Because so much is being sacrificed as a result, that's when the scales are sort of tipping the wrong way. And it's like, is this worth it for what I'm putting into it? Now, look, that could be easily challenged by so many people out there who have gotten to that point and pushed through, and it ended up being a complete success. Fine. So it goes back to my point around every single experience and person is different. And so the more you go into it, the more you live in it and try and test your resilience, the more you'll know when it's right for you as to like how far you can go. But a lot of the time it's more than you realize.
I suppose it's like everyone says, I mean, probably a bad thing for me to say being a wheelchair user, but it's that whole run before you can walk thing of, I think I've just illustrated there of like, I want to go to 200 when really I probably need to dial it back and build yourself up. So I think that's the thing as well, is knowing your boundary of what you can get to without going too far. Because I think we've spoken a little bit about society's hustle culture, and I do think there's an other element of, particularly as we're talking about resilience, of like toxic resilience in the way of just keep eating shit, when actually there's got to be a point where you go, actually, I'm not a fan of that anymore, I'm going to stop. Because as well, it's that whole thing of, I would say it's like flocking a dead horse of like, if it's not going to benefit you in the long run to push through, then maybe it's reposition. Have you seen people go down the route of going too far? Because I think that's something, I think it's a fine balance, particularly when we talk about hustle culture and bringing that toxicity of, there's a toxicity side of hustle culture and there's a toxicity side of resilience. Neither of them are innately wrong. It's just people take it to too much of an extreme.
Yeah. And so first, in response to, have I seen anyone kind of, has that happened to? I know of people where, they've taken it too far and they've had to sort of completely reset. And you're right, that sort of toxic resilience. I mean, funny enough, the name that comes to my head is, if you look at someone like, and I don't think he's necessarily toxic, but he gets that reputation, someone like David Goggins, where you've got that, reputation of this guy is just, he's sort of made of iron, that whole thing of like, it's always more, you can always do more, you're stronger than you know. And funny enough, he was someone that actually really sparked a bit of my interest in all of this. But some people would turn around and say it's too much. But again, it goes back to this thing that he's built that up over 20, 30 years or whatever. So he knows like what he can handle. So, and again, I think the problem is that people make everything about them. People make everything they read on social media and everything they hear very personal. And so when they see or hear someone saying, you should be doing more, you can be doing more, they think it's directed right at them. And if they don't agree with it, they think, well, that's not true because I've done so much and you're telling me I'm still not enough. And it's like, well, it's not about that. It's, for some people, that may be the trigger they need. But if that's too much for you, then that's okay, because you've got your kind of lens and the people that you respect and admire that are on your wavelength. And so again, it goes back to this thing of only you're going to know. And I don't think, it's never a comparison thing, is it? It's only ever you versus you. It's not about, well, I've made it here and someone's made it here who's further and better than me. Well, it's like, well, no, it's not about being better or stronger or fitter or whatever it is. It's, am I developing myself and creating a better version of myself each and every day? And sometimes that creating the better version can also be, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to be, I'm going to be at peace with who I am. That's part of it. That's that acceptance of like, I've done enough is okay. That's also right. It's not always about having to improve and hit a goal and, you know, whatever it is. It's like, I can accept that the way my life is good and that works for me. And it's like, good. Then have that, live that kind of life, have that attitude.
I think it's so important to remember that whole thing of just take a step back. And it's, as you say, it's okay to do nothing. Like we've spoken a lot about hustle culture and building a business and do, like a lot of people are doing things on the side and everything else. But there is nothing wrong with just taking 5. There's nothing. It's one thing I relate it back to, having spent a lot of time in the sports space, is the first valuable lesson anyone learns in sport is it isn't, you don't get better by particularly strength, you don't get better by doing it. You get better by recovering. So you need that time to recover, to recharge and rebuild. And I think that's such a powerful thing that I think people forget when it comes to professional lives, whether it be building a business, whether it be working, whether anything, you're allowed to take 5. And I think that's particularly something I want to see more companies doing, is giving people permission to take 5, because I think there's been a lot of movement of, we want you, if you're not working till 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night, you're not a decent employee. That shouldn't even be part of the discussion. Like, it's like I've always said, is you have to remember that they're building someone else's dream, not theirs. So if they want to do a job and just go home and go to their lives and goes back to their kids and do normal stuff, there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. Like, they should be doing that. And I think that's a culture that we need to cultivate and giving
100%.
people their lives back. Because I think too many of us get wrapped up in work. And I say this, guilty as charged. I am one of those. I'm the worst hypocrite when it comes to the whole taking 5, because in my head, I'll take 5, and in the back of my head, I'm going, oh, but you should really be editing that thing. You should really be doing that. You're not progressing. You should really be. And so I hear it and I say it as like, this is what we should be striving for, rather than like what we're doing now. I think we could do so much better.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're right. It's that, you know, I've got friends who work in the city in the banking industry, and it's like, you know, it's kind of a competition of who can stay the latest kind of thing. And like, and maybe the industry needs it, that they need that many hours behind it, of course. But yeah, it shouldn't become, again, going back to that word toxic, it shouldn't become a sort of like, if you're not doing at least this many hours, then, you know, we don't want you kind of thing. And I think there's a big space to go into in the workplace. You know, there's a lot of room. And I think the next 5 to 10 years is going to be really interesting in that space, about how they support employees' mental resilience, mental well-being. You know, it's definitely got a lot of room for improvement. It's getting better, but but it unfortunately has to kind of come from within. It's got to come from, like, can't just be, you know, the sort of the stuff on the edges about like, oh, we'll give you like a voucher or something like that. It's got to be sort of more embedded in the system.
And I think as well, one thing I would want to ask you is whether you'd worked with, and I say this as someone that's seen it's happen to friends and it's even happened to me, of, have you worked with many people where they're struggling in their professional lives and they're at sort of a low point, but then it's very hard for an individual that's at a low point, particularly when it comes to their career, because the discussions we had earlier of like all that, like, oh, I've got my bills to pay, I've got this, I've got that, I can't just stop. It's then very difficult to build someone back up, because they've lost their confidence. It's then very difficult to get their confidence back, because everything they're doing, they feel like they're doing wrong. Have you seen that a lot with clients in terms of, and how do you support them? Because I think I've seen it so in times, and I've had it to myself. It's very hard to get from that level 0 back to what you feel like you were before. So how do you start that journey if you've been through it?
Yeah, no, and I've had a few, and I've had people, you know, well into their 50s who have had a very successful career, and they're at rock bottom again, and they're not really sure how to get out of it. And I think it's, as you know, you just touched on it then, they've been up there before. So that's actually that's quite a good sign. It's like, you've been there. So we're not talking about unknown territory. We're talking about getting you back there. You know, it's within you. So that's a good thing. Number 2 is, again, it's knowing someone's with you in this journey. It's like, look, you've reached out to me. We're working together now. I'm on your side. I believe in you, but you need to have that self-belief as well. And together we will get there. You know, I'll be your guide, but you've got to do the work. So that self-belief is really important. And I think when someone's confidence is completely down, again, you've got to go back to, okay, well, what's knocked it in the first place? Why is it down? And it's all about the sort of, again, the layers. Get right down to the root of like, what is actually causing this confidence? You know, was it a particular person you worked with? Was it a particular deal you did that failed, that made you feel like a failure? Because at the end of the day, all the work we do, we are not it. You know, it's always that thing of like, you are not your business. You are not your job. You are so much more than that. But just because it might reflect on how you value yourself, it's important to obviously really, you know, to be passionate about what you do, but it does not represent who you are as a person. So it's that detachment that you need to kind of go through. And and just knowing that I've been there before, I can get back up. And again, it's that whole thing of it's a process. It's not going to happen overnight, but I will get back there. But I've got to, you know, you've got to go through the kind of the waves and the emotions and the layers to like really dig deep around like, okay, so what actually triggered this? What caused this? And what is the barrier to my recovery, healing, you know, rebuilding myself?
I think you're 100% right. I think probably one of the best messages I would have needed to hear at that time, and also friends would have needed to hear, is you've done it before. You've done it before, and you can do it again. And I think that's what we always forget. And I say that, as I say, been through it myself, and that's very hard to remember when you're in that point of nothing's going right. It feels like everything's gone completely pear-shaped. And yeah, it's so important to remember, like, as I think I said to a friend when we were having a discussion, I said, look at the small wins you had. Okay, last time this happened, you did this, all within very quickly from the worst happening to now you're here. So there's nothing stopping you doing that again. I'm not saying again that it's easy. And I think that's the hardest thing when you're talking someone through it, is making it sound like, I'm making it sound remarkably easy. I'm not saying it is remarkably easy. As saying's a lot easier than doing. And I think that's, how do you manage that? Because I can imagine, and this is an assumption, and as a coach, it's really hard to, because you can give them the best advice, but it's the action that actually sees the improvement. So then how do you manage that if someone's struggling with the whole, I hear everything you're saying, but I just don't know where to start and what to do? How do you manage that and support with that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's funny because even that word advice you've got to be very careful with it, because although technically you are there to give a bit of advice, nothing you say is going to be, they're only going to do something that they feel within, that they agree with and they feel they can do. So I always try and kind of get them to the answer without telling them. And so I refrain a lot from giving any sort of advice. It's more about reflecting back, like what they're saying to me, and I'm then to sort of, you know, I'm holding a mirror up to them essentially. And in terms of the other thing that I always do is between sessions, because although we're only meeting, let's say once a week, I always get them doing stuff in between the sessions. So there's exercises, there's stuff that they're actually to see the progress. You know, so this week we talked about, you know, this particular area of your life. I want you to go away and these are the exercises you're going to do for me. And you're going to come back with evidence of doing them. And you're going to show me. And we're going to see how they work. You know, did it work? Did it not? If it did, why did it feel good? Or why didn't it feel good? So I get them doing lots of stuff in between the sessions. And yeah, just making sure that I am getting them to give them time to really kind of hear themselves, because the chances are if they're coming to me, they don't really have anyone else to turn to, because we normally go to a coach because we think that we know that they know what they're doing. There's a kind of professional attitude to it, and we know that we can't turn to friends or family or whatever. So we're in a bit of a kind of loss, and we're like, I need someone who actually knows what they're talking about. And so they have that confidence and that faith. And that's why I always say, you know, we're on this journey together. And if I believe you can do it, then you can believe you can do it. It's going to be hard. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, you know, and it may take longer than you expect. But the difference is you are starting. And it's that thing of like, you know, it's the Dwayne Johnson thing, day one day, you know, today is the day, you know, no more of this kind of like attitude of like, whatever's going on, I can't do it. You know, it's really hard. It's like, today is the day change starts.
And I think as well that like you hit the nail on the head of sort of answering my question of earlier of like those little wins. I can imagine those little exercises that you get clients to do. That's where they go, shit, it's working. Wait, how did that works? And then that then feeds that whole, everyone loves progress. So it's like anything. If you start seeing results and you start going to the gym, you go, oh, I like that. I'm going to keep doing that. And that then builds that. And I suppose that then is the starting blocks of rebuilding.
Yeah, exactly. And as you said, like in the gym, it's a muscle. You've got to build it. You don't go to the gym once, do some weights, and you're massive. You've got to go back and
Yeah.
back and back, and it's like a progression. But it's like it's knowing that there's a really good quote where it's like day to day, nothing seems to have changed. But you look at, when you look back over a year, everything seems to have changed. And so it's like the change is happening. But even if it's only 0.1% a day, that's still something, and you've just got to stick with it and trust the process.
Compounding interest is where my brain went. It's the same thing
go.
of like over time things will just get bigger and bigger and bigger. What do you think of like where we're at as a society when it comes to mental health? Because I think we are getting better, and obviously you've come to this pod to chat about it today, and another guest in the past have all talked about it. So we are getting better at opening the conversations, but I still feel that there's something missing. And I think particularly with the work that you do in the professional space, I think that's such a space where we could be doing so much more, but people are too scared to say anything because you don't want to be seen as weak. You don't like, particularly if it's got your job on, not job on the line, but that's what people's thought process is. It's like, my job's on the line. I can't show my manager that I'm struggling because they're going to think I can't keep up with the job. How do we change that? How would you like society to change, and what is your viewpoint on it at the moment?
So I think mental health the conversations around it have gotten better. We definitely are seeing improvements over even the last 10 years, but there is still a long way to go. I think the taboo is lessened, particularly in our generation. However, it feels like the barrier is that we're talking about it more, but are people actually doing something about it? So I think amongst friends, family, it's becoming more of a dinner time conversation, and that's great. But there's still a bit of resistance to be like, well, I know I'm not okay, and I've said that to someone, but am I actually doing anything to change the fact that I'm not okay? Am I going to see a coach or a therapist? Am I actually changing what's going on in my day-to-day life and the way I feel and the way I think? And a lot of time people aren't. They're sort of, it's like, I said it now, but nothing's changed. And it's like, you've got to kind of,
what? Yeah,
exactly. And so in answer to your question around with respect to the workplace and kind of how can people navigate that, I do think that there is a sort of, there is still a bit of a taboo that particularly in big organizations, and I came from one in the city, where there's thousands of people working there, you do feel quite isolated a lot of the time. And if you're not really enjoying the work, but you can't really turn to your line manager because you don't really have that kind of bond. I think the whole teamwork thing and the relationships you build with people are so important. And I think that's not touched on enough. It's kind of because of the like dog eat dog world in a way, and everyone's out for themselves. Yeah. It seems like we have our work life and our personal life, and they're very split, but our work life takes up a third of our life, more or less. So how can it, if anything, it is part of our personal life. And it's that ability to kind of bring people together in other ways beyond just the work, day-to-day work. And, whether you talk about socials and what people do after work, or whether you talk about people in their breaks, conversations that go on in the office, I think there can be a lot around allowing people to bring more of themselves to work. And by that, I mean giving people the chance to kind of talk about, their own lives and stuff, like doing things where you're not just kind of focused on the day-to-day job, but you're actually doing things that you want to be doing. And, I know that even with socials, it's like they're all centered around going out to the pub and drinking. And it's like, even that's changing. There's not, less people in our generation particularly are kind of as interested in that. And why can't we do things that are more aligned with the things that we enjoy? Why can't we kind of give that person who's maybe a little bit more shy a chance to sort of open up a little bit and give her a bit more responsibility? Because that's, that's something he or she would want.
Yeah.
Why aren't we doing things that, for each time we do a social, give it like responsibility to each person in the team so that everyone's having their voice, and it's like, well, I really like doing this and we're all going to do it. Granted, you're not always going to like everything people suggest, but you've got to play around with this thing of we are a team. And you are not alone in like whatever job you are doing. That idea of like feeling like you're going into a workplace and that you can't really turn to anyone, you can't really talk about anything but work, can like have a real negative effects on your mental health. So I think, I said, there's loads you can kind of routes you can go down, but unfortunately there does need to be a big shift.
I 100% agree. One of the big things I always say, I've seen on a lot of companies, is people forget that people are humans. Like that's what I find the most crazy thing is. I sit there and go, yeah, we've all got different lives going on. We all are humans. We all have good days, bad days, this, that, the other. And particularly when I look at management and anyone that's like looking after a team, that should be your bread and butter of like, I'm dealing with a human being. You don't know like what's going on in their personal lives. And that's kind of what you've just said of like opening the conversation, not saying like you've got to wear your heart on your sleeve and tell everyone everything, but having that ability to go to team members, particularly managers. I'm thinking of it from a sort of, because we've talked about resilience and some struggling with their mental health. If that's something that's happening, having that open channel to your manager opens the conversation of, look, I'm really struggling with this. I need help and this is impacting my work because of X. Having that channel open where there's not going to be that feeling of, oh, but then they're going to think I can't do the job or they're going to start looking to replace me or blah, blah. That shouldn't even be part of the conversation, because we all should be always remembering that, like anyone, they have mental health struggles, whether that's you're the manager and you're having a mental health struggle. Like my belief, and this is a bit of a controversial one, is a manager should really be able to go to the team when they're struggling, because my opinion is if you go to your team, go, look guys, I'm struggling, they can bound around you a lot more than if you try and hide it from them. Yes, there's an element of you're the manager, you're meant to take the brunt, you're meant to support your team members. But in my eyes, that is supporting your team members because they know what's going on with you. So they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Instead of you just being a dick for the sake of being a dick, you can be like, look, this is what's going on and this is why I need help. I think I've said on this podcast so many times, I've realized over the last few years that everything comes back to poor communication. If you scale anything back far enough, it's all communication. If everyone actually just spoke to each other like a human being, we'd be far more further forward.
Yeah. And you know what, you said it earlier, a lot of the time, and I will touch back on the communication thing, you know what, 99% of the time in life, unless it's a rare life or death situation, it's not that big a deal. And I think people do a lot of the time take things too seriously, even at work. And it's like, at the end of the day, this project I'm working on, or this PowerPoint, or this, you know, even if it's a deal, I get that there's lots of money involved, whatever. And I get that you need the kind of attention and things need to go right.
Yep.
But it shouldn't be at the detriment to like someone's entire kind of existence, to the point where they feel like, yeah, as you said, they're not being treated like a human being. And I think a lot of the time it's like stepping back and realizing that, because even like 5 minutes can help someone. You know, it's just that thing of being like, even like a manager saying to a more junior employee, like, yeah, I'm also like, I'm quite scared as well. Like, I'm quite worried about this. Like, I'm in the same boat as you. You know, we're in this together, because normally the most junior person thinks I'm the only one who doesn't get what's going on here. But actually, a lot of the time, a lot of the people higher up also don't really know what they're doing. And it's that ability to be able to kind of bring people along with you. And so, yeah, that communication thing, exactly. Anything. Life is about communication in relationships with people, at work, whatever it is, communication with yourself. It's such an important thing. And I think we sometimes forget that that like the communication we have with each other it doesn't have to sort of involve everything that's going on around us. Like it can come down to just a simple thing of like checking in on someone and just being like, you know, you're right. Like, you know, let's talk about something a bit kind of lighter at the moment, or let's take you away from what's going on, and just kind of just step back and not take it so seriously, because as I said before, a lot of the time it isn't.
And I think as well, I've said it's that whole thing of keeping that channel open and having that channel open so that if they want to or feel comfortable to, they can. Because I think a lot of the time the reason why we don't do that at work is because we feel like we can't. Because we still have this viewpoint of, particularly when it comes to managers and senior members of the team, like, oh, they've got it all together, they're absolutely fine, everything's fine. You know, I don't want to go to them and show that I'm struggling. So then but as I say, it's just having that channel open of, even they might not use it, but it's there if they want it. I think that's such an important culture to cultivate. And as you say, it's that thing of, we're in this together, rather than, it's like I've seen it in a lot of companies. It's almost like the top layers, like boys club. Like, you can't get in, don't say anything. You got to say all the right things and pat your head 3 times. And it's like, it's so interesting that we're still in that scenario. And I'm only talking from my experiences. I mean, it's crazy that we're still here. I just would hope that we're further along.
Yeah, I think there's definitely progress. It is kind of getting better, but I think, and maybe I do spend a fair bit of time on social media, so I kind of see a lot of, again, the younger generation who are on there, and all these videos that get posted across TikTok and Instagram, and everyone expressing their views and opinions and what they're going through. And sometimes I do feel a bit kind of sad about it all, because it's like, God, there's a lot of sort of, oh, life's hard, woe is me, victimhood, whatever, like that kind of, things are really difficult. Life's, I didn't realize it'd be this bad. Like, I don't like my job. Like, is this what life is? Is that it? And it's like, well, no, it really doesn't have to be. Like, you have a choice to make things better. We really do, but we've got to kind of work together in it. We cannot, the sort of society is, we're human beings. We've survived millions of years across every single kind of thing that could have gone wrong, from natural disasters. We've outlived most animal species, and we're still here because we're incredibly strong and smart, and we stayed as a community. And when, obviously we know that loneliness in itself is a kind of massive cause of mental illness. And it's that we need people around us, and we need people to believe in us as well as believing in ourselves. And knowing that, like, you're here on earth, there is a lot to be kind of incredibly grateful for. And obviously, I'm speaking for myself now, and, but there also are people around me in the same situation. And so it's we can make it better. You are not kind of a lost cause. It's not like, right, there's no hope now. There's always a way to kind of find some form of that hope, which I think is really important, that belief. So yeah, I think it's, there's a lot to kind of work on, but yeah, I'm positive about it in terms of, like, the more of, there's more people helping, and there's more people kind of getting involved in providing that kind of, like, genuine connection with people, and, like, doing good for the world and looking out for people. And so yeah,
I think it's really interesting because, like you say, that other thing of, I think it's that whole zoom out thing, of, like, actually, it's not that deep. It's not that important. No, the world's not about to end. But particularly when it comes to our professional lives, it can be very hard for someone that's in the thick of that mindset to look at someone that's going, there is more to like, there is more to like, you just need to change something. I think that's a very difficult conversation to have, of, like, there's that argument of, oh yeah, but Will, you've got it all together. Like, that's completely different. It's not, and I'd imagine, is that something that you've dealt with before, of, like, that whole thing of people are looking at people that have gone through your process and are doing better and feel a lot more comfortable and a lot more resilient, but then they're like, oh, but it's not going to work for me.
Yeah, and that when you said that statement around, like, well, you've got your life together, so it's easy for you, and it's like, yeah, but there was a time when I also did it. Like, there was a time when I also was all over the place, and there's still times even now when I sort of think a bit like, wait, what am I even doing? So we love to look at the kind of highlight reel of people's lives, don't we? We look at the tip of the iceberg, but unfortunately a lot of that is displayed again on social media. But it's like, never judge someone for where they've come from or who they are, because you don't know the full story. And it's also, again, like, if you're spending your time talking about how getting annoyed at other people, and people who are coming across as, oh, your life's together, you've had it so easy, you don't know what I've been through. It's like, why are you making it about me? You've got to put the mirror up, come back to yourself. Like, you may have had a really hard life. You may have gone through worse stuff than most people. And that is, digging yourself out that hole is going to be hard, but you can do it. Like, it's not impossible. There are people who've got, and I've worked with clients, I've worked with, particularly more from a sort of therapy side of things, with people who have been through more than I've ever heard of. And they are still showing up every day, being kind, working on themselves, trying to get better. So as much as it's important to validate your feelings and sort of think, yeah, this is really hard, and I don't know how I'm going to get out of this place, it's also important to be like, but I can. And I can have a bit of gratitude over, like, if I am in a situation, there's always something that can be done. And that comes from that strength within, that resilience, that sort of ability. Again, I keep going back to it, this kind of self-belief and that choice you have to think, okay, today is the day that, like, things start to change. And no matter how hard it is, you look at the analogy of rolling a boulder up a hill. Even if I can move it 1 inch a day, 1 centimeter a day, whatever tiny incremental movements, I'm going to do it, and no one's going to stop me. And if I need support, I need support. And if I break down, I break down. But it's like, get back up again, and get back up, and keep getting back up.
Yeah. But I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, it's what I've said to friends, particularly having disability. Everyone thinks that, oh, wow, like, you're amazing. Oh my God, you've done all these amazing things and you've got a disability. It must be, like, it's really impressive. But what I always say to people is, you have to remember that people only know what they know. So people only have a tolerance for the stress, the anxiety, the this, the that, the other of what they've already been exposed to before, because that's their threshold. That's the highest they've ever gone. So they don't know if they can go further. So you can say, oh, like I'm an inspiration because I'm doing this, that, the other as a wheelchair user, but that doesn't take away from anyone else's struggles. And I think that's something I always say is you have to. Pain is relative. It's all down to what you've experienced rather than, because we see it all the time in the disability community. You end up playing disability top trumps. My disability is worse than yours. I've got this. You've got that. Oh, really, guys? Why are we playing this game? But we all fall into it because you go, oh, like that's really tough, or that's really this. But and I think that's another thing we need to remember is like people only have a tolerance for what they already know. Yeah. And you can't judge someone for struggling with something because you might look at something and go, what are you struggling with that for? But that might be their 100%, and that's no one's fault, and it's really important to remember.
Yeah, and you're right. You have that box, and we fill our box with the pain that we've gone through, or the trauma we've experienced, or whatever it is. And everyone's box is a different size, it's a different shape, it's a whatever. But you fill that box. So according to you, that is the kind of worst pain you can feel, and that's completely valid. And yes, you don't want to compare to the next person's. There's always someone worse off. There's always someone better off. However, it is really important to, once you've acknowledged that, to then not go too far down the other way where you, as I said, you start, it becomes a little bit of the victim playing. It becomes a little bit of like, and because of this, I will never be okay again. And it's like, but if you tell yourself that, then that's going to become your reality. That doesn't mean I'm demeaning what you've been through. I'm not telling you that what you've gone through is not hard enough for you to say, I'm down and out. I'm just saying, if you create the narrative in your head that because you've been through something so awful, that's now going to define your life, you will get stuck in that narrative and it will become harder and harder to get out of. But you do have the ability to get out of it because you're here on earth, you're a human being, you have incredible strength and resilience behind you. You just need to be able to access it. And yes, find help, get support. Don't do it on your own. It's a very lonely journey to do it on your own. Like, I wouldn't recommend that because a lot of the time you don't know what you're doing. But however means you do it, it's that kind of inner voice to tell you, like, I'm not going to let this dictate the rest of my life and stay down and out because, you know, if you, for a split second, you do have to think like, well, if they can do it, then so can I. Because I think that can be really healthy. Yeah. If you do hear a story about someone who's overcome incredible adversity and, you know, really kind of been at the sort of depths of hell, and they've still managed to come back out and they are where they are today, I think that can give you a lot of inspiration, and that can be really encouraging because it's like, well, if they can do it, why can't I? We're both human beings. Like, we're both, you know, we may be different people, but it doesn't mean that I can't just, you know. So I get where you're coming from.
It's interesting because I think everything comes down to a balance. And there's a balance to, there's nothing wrong with sitting in the mud and feeling what you're feeling, but there comes a point where you got to go, right, okay, you got to do something because otherwise you're just going to stay there, and that's not going to help anyone. And I think that's a fine balance. Like, I'm not saying that I've got it right completely, and I'm sure Will's not got it right completely either, but it's such a hard thing to, as we said earlier, you can't go too far either way. Same with resilience. You can't go all the way over because you'll burn out. So what about, like, in terms of, obviously we've spoken a lot about the longer form work that someone can do to improve their resilience, improve their mental health. What are some, like, smaller strategies to someone listening that they could possibly implement today to sort of slowly start improving their resilience and their mental health?
Yeah. So acceptance that, okay, you know, things aren't okay. I need to sort of, today's the day that things change, and knowing that it's a slow moving train, but starting somewhere is the most important. Knowing that no one's watching. It's not about, you know, don't feel ashamed. Don't feel like whatever level you start at is, you know, you've done a good job to recognize that. And I think it's about, I think the most important thing is to know that something's got to change each day. So something, that inner voice that you're going to probably be battling with, that's kind of going to be your biggest barrier to all of this. Because unfortunately, for reasons we can't control, it's you versus your, I always call it the egoic mind, negative mind, whatever you want to call it. You're at battle with it. And you can either make it your worst enemy or your best friend. And day one is going to be your worst enemy. Probably it's going to be telling you, no, don't you dare go down this route. It's never going to work. You're never going to be better. You're just going to stay like this for the rest of your life. And you've got to be able to just on that day say, not today. And I'm going to use an example in terms of building mental resilience from something that I did myself, where I actually started using running as a way to kind of start pushing myself a bit. You know, I started only 2 years ago, and I was like, you know what, I've got a longer term goal to run a marathon. Let's start on day one when I could barely run not run far at all. So for someone, it's like, okay, day one, I'm going to run to the end of my street. Day two, I'm going to run double that. And then you build and you build. And over time, it's like, look how far I've come. And the point is not about the exercise. It's not about the fitness and how strong you're getting or how fit you're getting or fast you're getting. It's about your voice will say to you, don't go on the run today. Stay at home, sit on the sofa, be comfortable. That's what you like doing. That's what's good for you. And it's the ability for you to say no. Because my voice has told me I don't want to do this, that is why I'm going to do it. Again, we've talked about how that has to be a balance there, but it's your negative mind is always going to want to find comfort and ease in your life, and you've got to be able to override it when it's necessary, because that's where resilience comes from. Resilience is about building and training the muscle that says, no, I don't want to do this, and no, this is scary or whatever, and you being like, okay, but I'm going to push that and test it and see what it's like. Because when we get knocked down in life by things that happen outside of our control, no matter how much training you do, you don't know how you're going to respond to it. You know, anything in the moment, you just don't know what you're going to, how bad it's going to be and how you're going to feel. But by training your brain and training your mind to build that resilience and to kind of be uncomfortable more, the time it's going to take for you to get back up and to move past that really hard time is going to shorten. Because instead of thinking, you know, this is so hard, I'm never going to get out of this, you're going to think, okay, this is hard and I'm accepting that and I'm going to go through the emotions, but I'm used to this. I've kind of felt this before a bit. I know what it's like, and I'm going to work with myself because I've now trained myself to be my best friend, to have that voice in my head saying, look, we can do this. Like we are strong enough. We're going to get through this. And so, it's just break it down into day to day, and you've just got to start finding out, you know, what works for you. What is that activity you're going to start doing that's going to start helping you to get out of your head a bit, get into your body a bit more? You know, what is it going to be that's going to get you feeling good about yourself? And that can be anything. And it's not about the activity. It doesn't matter the activity specifically isn't building that resilience. Like you could be like, oh, I want to go to a life drawing class. I'm going there because I'm going to do something that I've always wanted to do that feels a bit out of my kind of comfort zone, because it's, you know, I'm going to meet some new people and just try it. And I'm just going to do it, and I'm going to see how I feel. If I love it, great. That's something I can latch onto, and that's for me. If I don't, fine, move on to the next thing. But you've got to you've got to test the waters and just be willing to push the boat out a bit and step into that zone of discomfort.
And I think that's where people would give you the argument of, I don't have time to do that, Will. Particularly when you talk about, like, you're completely right. Our generation doesn't do enough of what we enjoy and try different things because we get too caught up in, we've got to take the kids here, we've got to take the kids there, we've got to make sure we're building our side hustle, we've got to make sure we're going to the gym, make sure we're doing all this. And they'll go, yeah, so I haven't got time to go to that drawing class. What would you say to that?
Yeah, it's the world's best excuse, isn't it? And it is an excuse, because when push comes to shove, if I was to say to you, and I don't mean to be morbid about this, but if I was to say to you, like, oh, one of your family members has, you know, taken the time or whatever, that, you know, they need help, you need to rush over to them because they need whatever, you'd be there in a split, you'd be there in a heartbeat, you know. So then if you can do that, you wouldn't say, no, I don't have time, you know, because it matters. So people love to say, I don't have time, when it doesn't matter enough. It's the same thing with, like, when people say, oh, you know, I don't like getting up early because, you know, I'm too tired or whatever. It's like, yeah, but if you had a flight to catch, you'd be up. You wouldn't be missing that flight. So it's when it matters, when it actually,
yeah.
It's true. It's true. No matter what time, if I gave you a 5 a.m. flight. So it's, and you know what that is? That partly comes down to discipline. And so it's that ability to be able to say, well, instead of saying, oh, I don't have time, make time. You know, you have time to watch 2 hours of Netflix and you have time to scroll through Instagram for an hour. So why do you not have time to do something that's actually going to benefit you a bit more? So it's about priorities, and it's about understanding what is it that I know that I need to do that's going to help me grow and to become a better version of myself. And yeah, there are times it's going to not be that enjoyable and you're not going to really want to do it. But that's where the discipline kicks in, because you're not always going to have the motivation, and you need to be able to say, even if I don't want to do it, I know this is good for me. I know this is going to grow. This is going to help me grow. And so therefore, that whole excuse of just be honest with yourself as well. Instead of saying I don't have time, just say I don't want to. At least you're being more honest. If someone says, oh, let's, do you want to come, I don't know, let's say they say do you want to come do whatever activity it is, rather than, I don't have time, I've got work on, just say, no, I don't want to, I don't fancy doing that. That's not something that I'm interested in. Because then at least you're staying true to yourself. And it's like, okay, well then what are you interested in? What would you rather be spending your time doing? So yeah, you've got to be able to kind of not lie to yourself.
Do you think there's power? Because I think that's a bit of because that's something we're seeing a lot more of like, owning up to just being like, I don't want to do that. But do you think there's power in it? Because I think I've always found it's a bit of a tricky one for me to wrap my head around of like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with being like, that doesn't align with what I want to do, so I'm not going to do it. But then that becomes a slippery slope when it's like that. If you take that again, it's that extremes thing. If you take that to the extreme of being like, anything you don't want to do, you're not going to do. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, you can, and you're right. Like with all this stuff, it's like you don't want to go to one extreme. I mean, it always comes back to one of my favorite phrases is becoming your authentic self, and being your authentic self means doing what is right for you and what you want to be doing. Now that doesn't always mean you've got to be brutally honest. It just means not lying, doesn't it? It's just, okay, am I doing something because it's probably for the best versus I really don't want to be here, I don't want to be doing this, I don't want to see that person or whatever it is. So there's a balance, as with everything. And I think it's the ability to say, if this serves me, or at least if it doesn't serve me, as long as it keeps me kind of in this middle part, as long as it's not taking things away. So for example, if we use the example of a friend who you no longer want to be friends with, because when you see them, you leave feeling worse, then that is an example where you need to be honest and say, this isn't serving me anymore. If you see them and you go away feeling the same, so they haven't added to your kind of feelings or whatever, if you're just the same, you don't have a great time, but you don't have a bad time, fine. For the sake of kind of not upsetting the apple cart, if you have to turn up somewhere with them there, then just do it. But I don't think it's a bad thing I think it's important not to shy away from being willing to sort of say when something is or isn't right for you and when you don't want to do something. Because unfortunately, what we have in a lot of friendship groups and all throughout our lives is we become people pleasers, where we just say yes constantly because we don't want to upset people. We don't want to deal with with people saying, oh, like, why are you saying no? That's really rude, or whatever it is. And then we end up serving other people more than we serve ourselves. And that is a massive cause of unhappiness, because it goes back to this thing that you're not being you. You're not living your life. You're living someone else's life because you're trying to please everyone.
Yeah. And I think there's I think you hit the nail head of like, there's again, we're talking extremes. I think when people hear that, they're like, oh, like you saying no to a friend doesn't have to be no, fuck you. It can be a lot nicer than that. Like, I think everyone seems to think it's like you've just got to downright be a bad person. It's like, no, you can coax them round to it. And I know that that's probably not the ideal way to do it, but you can soften the blow rather than going straight in for the jugular of, I don't want to see you anymore. But I wanted to quickly just touch on, before we do the last three questions, I wanted to quickly touch on, because one of the assumptions a lot of people make when you talk of being your authentic self is it can feel to some people like quite a idealistic view, and quite, I can't think of a better way that people describe it, but like quite witchy woo and quite like, oh yeah, that's all fine and dandy, like, but that's not the real world. What would you say to that? Because I think, again, it's that, I think for me, it's that whole thing of, as we've said several times, it's about balance of like, yeah, I'm not saying that everything's going to be sunshine and roses all the time and everything you do is always going to be aligning with your authentic self. But what's your take on it in terms of, because I think that's a big part of the discussion when we talk about being our authentic selves. Yeah.
It's still a bit of a foreign concept, I think, to a lot of people, but it seems quite ironic that so many people live with essentially a mask on. That it's like if anything, the only thing we can be is ourselves, and yet so many people struggle to do that. And so when so many times with clients or just in general day-to-day conversations, it almost always comes back to when people have a problem with things, when they're not feeling good about things, it's because they're not aligning to sort of what really is right for them, what works for them, how they feel. They're either putting someone else's feelings ahead of theirs. They're either putting someone else's, life in front of theirs. And I think it's a journey. Like the authentic self isn't sort of okay, if I start speaking my mind and just being brutally honest, am I being authentic? It's like, well, no, there's more to it than that. It's this whole thing of you can still be a very genuine, nice, lovely, friendly person and still be authentic to yourself. And so it's a term that I've only kind of started to really delve into over the last sort of year or two, but it aligns quite nicely with a lot of the kind of Buddhist concepts around, living life in a way that you are getting rid of a lot of the external noise of life, and you're kind of coming back to, okay, well, what's really going on inside? Because life happens from within the inside out, doesn't it? Change on the inside, change on the outside. And I think, whereas a lot of people think it's the other way around, it's like, oh, well, if I'm in a good situation, then I can be happy. And it's like, well, no. It's you've got to reverse that.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of, when people do challenge it and they see it as a bit of a kind of, a bit of a fantasy world, a bit of a kind of like, well, that's just unrealistic. Like, you can't be like that with the amount of stuff going on around you in day-to-day life. It's like, well, again, you're just proving my point that your narrative in your head is, well, you can't do that. You can't be like that. And it's like, well, then you're going to start believing that. Whereas if I have someone that does, and they're willing to be like, okay, I'm willing to go on that journey. Let's see where this takes me. It's going to be a hard journey, but it's going to result in a lot of good. You're not going to turn around and be like, oh God, I completely regret becoming more of myself throughout my life. So yeah, it's kind of again, it comes back to this kind of how you paint the picture in your head.
I must admit, it's the same thing I always say to people. What's the worst? One piece of advice I would always try to live by is what's the worst that could happen? Or as my dad would put it, no one died.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
And like, so when you talk about changing the way we view things, it's like, okay, so Will's come to me with a different viewpoint. I'm gonna go with him on this journey for 6 months. See what it's all about. See if it works, and then I can make an informed decision after that. Is this classic thing of like, we still fall into the trap of like, we've got to be one or the other. We can't. You can't. It's like, you've got to be a believer, non-believer.
Well, exactly. And it's like, it doesn't work like that. Life's not black and white. And again, even on my socials, I'm like, look, challenge me. Like, I'm not any necessarily wiser than you. Like, I'm just speaking my thoughts. I want to be challenged. I want to be told, like, wait a minute, I don't agree with that. But don't tell me that I shouldn't believe that, or I shouldn't do that because it's wrong or right, because it's not about that, because I've worked this out for myself and I'm still working it out. You've got to take, a little bit of from around you, fine. But at the end of the day, it's kind of an ongoing thing. And if after 6 months you've taken a certain approach and it doesn't work, supposedly, that doesn't mean that, right, that's it, I give up. That's it. It's 6 months in the grand scheme of your life. Like, it's an ongoing journey. We're talking years, not months. But that evolution is part of the process. It's like that whole process is you becoming like more of yourself, because you're realizing what doesn't work for you and what does. And again, it goes back to our point earlier around like, just don't take it all too seriously. It's like, we're just having fun, we're experimenting, we're living our day-to-day lives and just seeing what happens and going with the flow a lot of the time. And that's all right. Like, I don't need anyone telling me I'm doing it right or wrong. It's just, okay, this is how I feel, this is how I'm going to do it for now, and let's go with it. And I'm like, yeah, great, do it, let's do it. As long as you're staying true to it though, don't say you're going to do one thing and then do another. Yeah.
100%. And lastly, before I ask about the last question, I wanted to do a bit more, find out a bit more about your clothing company.
Yeah, so H Clothing, it was the first business I had out of the job. So it was a bit of a sort of step in the dark, well, leap in the dark actually, because I'd come from the city, as I said, decided to start a fashion brand. And it all sparked from me going through my own kind of personal grief, where I lost my younger brother, and he had actually started this idea of kind of putting fashion and mental health together. And I decided to make it a reality because it was something he really believed in. It was an incredible piece of work. And yeah, so I spent the first year building it, creating it, getting everything, sustainable fashion brand, clothes are made in Portugal. We donate some of the profits to a mental health charity that's also very close to my heart. And we sell t-shirts, hoodies, sweatshirts, so very casual wear. And it was an amazing kind of journey and experience, and something that is running today. That is, as I said, it will always be my baby. It's as I said, it really taught me how to run a business. And don't get me wrong, it came with a lot of stress and anxiety and all the kind of things you get when you start your first business. And I learned a lot from it, but I loved it, and I still love it. And so it's been like a really kind of center point of my journey through being an entrepreneur, and even in the mental health world as well, because that was what was the trigger for me to then get into the coaching and sort of counseling world.
What about, I'm intrigued by, obviously you said that it was your first venture out of working your 9-to-5 job. What was that transition like? Because we touched on earlier of people struggling with that transition of whether to jump or stay. What was that transition like for you?
I'll tell you what, the actual leaving was the easiest thing I've ever done. I'd already switched off mentally, and I just didn't want to be at that job anymore. And I was so ready to do my own thing. The transition from having, like, being told what to do and turning up in an office and having a little bit of structure to then every day is kind of what you make of it was quite hard, because I also did it on my own. I wasn't partnering with anyone. I was doing completely on my own. So I didn't have any accountability. So I had to really learn quickly to step up and actually be making sure that my days were being as effective as possible. And that took a long time. And as a result, it meant that I went through a lot of kind of, as I said, the imposter syndrome stuff. I went through a lot of not, is this the right thing to do? I don't have a soundboard here. I mean, I spoke to my parents a bit about it, and they helped in many ways. But no one really knows what you're going through apart from you. And so it was probably a bit of a lesson that I learned, that if I was ever to start like another business like that, again, I would probably do it with someone else, because then at least you're riding the highs and lows together. Because it was very isolating at times. It meant I learned a lot more, a lot quicker, because I had to do everything myself. But yeah, the actual kind of the leaving the job bit wasn't that hard. It was more the kind of starting the business and actually, realizing how much is going to go wrong and how little I wish I'd had someone like a mentor or someone there to sort of guide me a little bit more, so I wouldn't have, made as many mistakes. But then again, that's kind of I like to think that makes you better in the future, because you have to go through them yourself. So yeah.
What about obviously a lot of the work you do is around resilience and mental health. What was your journey like with that during that time? Because I can imagine, although you'd switched off from your 9-to-5 job, I can imagine that realization of shit, now it's me and that's it. What was that? What was that transition like? Because for me, I sit there and go, that would be terrifying. More so going, is this going to, what would be going through my head would be, is this going to work? Is this not going to work? So what was that like for you? What was your, I can't remember what you called it earlier, but what was your anxiety brain saying to you then at that point?
Yeah. My ego at mine. So I made a promise to myself that from that day, no matter what happened, I would always prioritize my mental health and my kind of, and how I was. So even if I had to work like an 18-hour day or whatever it was, I still made sure I was doing the things, that there were things in place, my morning routine, my evening routine, whatever it was, to make sure that I was never getting to burnout stage or to the point where I couldn't carry on, or the work was being affected as a result. And I've stayed true to that. And then the unknown was obviously really scary. Is this right? Is this going to work? How much money? All this kind of stuff. That's just natural. But again, I think by the time I'd got to that point, I'd read enough and started listening to enough podcasts that I kind of knew that a lot was going to go wrong anyway, and that I wasn't going to have a lot of control over some of it. And I'd sort of set myself up already to at least a little bit anticipate that it was going to be a hard journey. And then when the hard times did come and there was stress and things went wrong, it was a case of, I always split it into two. Can I do something about it? If I can, do it. If I can't, accept it, move on. Because when you dwell on something you can't control, you're just causing more problems in your head, and you're suffering even more for no reason. So I got quite good at being quite snappy with the whole, stress out for 5 minutes, scream, shout, whatever, cry. But once you've done that and you've released it, crack on. What can you actually change to make it better? So, and that's still stuff that I have to kind of remind myself of today. But it really helped me with, making sure that I was always okay personally, like on my mental, emotional and physical health was always prioritized. And I think not enough people in the entrepreneurial world do that. And that's why it's got such a high rate of burnout and all the rest of it, because work comes first, or their business comes first, and they come second. And then look what happens.
But I think it's like, and I say this as someone who says it about the projects he works on as well, it's that whole mentality of it's your baby. So priority is here, you're down here, when it should, as you said, it should be the other way around, because realistically, as we've said earlier, it's not life or death most of the time,
exactly.
90% of the time. What about we've talked a lot about the struggles. What's been your highest high with both companies?
So HJ, I think, was the day of launch. So I did this big launch it was funny enough, actually, my parents' house, because they live in London, and I had all my friends turn up, all the clothes all around. And I think people were quite pleasantly surprised. I think they didn't think it was going to be what it was. And, it was just really nice to know that my, whatever it was, 12 months of work to get to that point was like a reality. So that was a really kind of proud day. And that was probably one of the highs. And then in terms of my business now, it was probably the first time I got a client testimonial. So I'd gone through the process with a client, and they turned around and written me a testimonial and been like, yeah, this is work. Like, my life is, I feel like so much change. It's been amazing working with Will. He's completely transformed my life. Validation that what I was doing was actually working.
Yeah.
That's something that for me was a great moment. And every testimonial since as well. It's always lovely.
I suppose as well with a service like that, it's very much like you've got someone's trust in your hands to see that it's worked and it's helped them would be massive. Like, God, I mean, I know we've talked a lot about anxiety, but yeah, someone putting that level of trust in you must have been quite stressful.
Yeah, I've had to kind of learn about also compartmentalizing, not making why they're coming to me about my life, because once you come off the call and stuff, I'm always doing stuff in the background to make sure I'm giving them the best service possible and learning myself and how I can help them, but also being able to shut off and not taking it into my own life. And so, yeah, they do put a lot of trust in me, but that's why I have said no to people that I feel like I can't help, because I'm not going to put them in a position where they open up to me and I feel like, actually, you know what, I can't do this, because then that will stop them from getting help the next time, because they feel like, wait a minute, you said you could do this, and now you're telling me that you don't want to work with me anymore. So you've got to be quite strict about it as well, about what you can and can't do.
I must admit, that must be quite a hard skill to develop as well, because naturally, as someone like yourself, your instinct, I can imagine, is you want to help everyone. Yeah, to fight that must be really hard.
Yeah, and I get DMs all the time, people saying, I need help, all this stuff. And I always say, look, reach out to me via my email on my website, and I'll get back to you. And I always give people that first 10, 15-minute consultation call to see, but they're talking about stuff that I haven't dealt with or I don't know about. I will just have to say, I'm really sorry. And sometimes they accept it. Sometimes they say, well, can you tell me who I can go to? And yeah, it's really difficult, but particularly when it's your own business and it's like, you're kind of there to make money as well, which sounds kind of sometimes a bit wrong. So it's like, I'm making money off people's mental health, and it's obviously not like that, but you could just say yes to everyone and just take their money, but it's that, I'd feel morally kind of quite bad if I was just saying yes to everyone, even if I knew actually deep down I wasn't able to help them. So yeah, that was, again, a bit of a kind of unwritten rule I gave to myself when I started taking clients on.
It's a really tricky one, because it's that whole thing of quality over quantity as well. It's that whole thing of you'd only be able to, you'd want to give the best you can to someone, particularly in that situation where you're dealing with their mental health as well. Like, yeah, you don't want to half-ass that either. Completely. So yeah, so it's always something I've been really really in awe of with that sector, is that ability to be able to say no. Because I think in more traditional sectors, it's a lot more of the money aspect of it rather than, because in your sector, it's very much the help rather than the money aspect. Yeah.
And that's the thing. I've got to remind myself, like, I can't help everyone as much as I want to. But sometimes, I always make an effort to reply to every single message I get. I still kind of at least send something, and sometimes that's all they need, just like a message and response. And so I also try to do a little bit of work in the background from like a volunteering perspective as well to help more people. So it's, there's always ways to help people, even if it's not to do specifically with my business. But yeah, that's unfortunately the case, is that you're not going to be everyone's kind of support system. But that's why I do my best on my social media side of things to put things out there that are genuinely helping people. At least I like to think. And that's when you get those responses like, your post really helped me today is always really nice.
Love those. I love those. Even when I get them, I'm like, that's why I do what I do.
Exactly. Yeah, it can have more power than you realise.
Definitely. And I think as well, it's that whole thing of, it also confirms it for yourself that you're doing something good. And I think that's always a really nice thing to have as well. But lastly is the question that I ask every guest, which is, what's one piece of politically correctness that you really strongly agree with or disagree with?
I don't know if this comes under the bracket a bit, but one I disagree with is, and I see it a lot, again, particularly on social media, is when people say, once I have X, then I'll be happy. Or if only I had this, then I'd be happy. And a lot of the time that X is filled in with the word money. Once I have a bit of money, then I'll be happy. And I'm like, no, it really doesn't work like that. It's not once I have this, then I'll be happy. And also, then I'll be happy. It's like, you're asking for a lot there. Like, no one's happy the entire time. And there's just so many kind of things that are wrong with that statement in itself. And it does just worry me a bit, because it's like it's that goal thing again. It's like, if I get this, all my problems will go away. And it's like, you're just thinking about it the complete wrong way. And by saying that, that is probably a big reason why you are not happy. And people don't like to hear it, but I just think it's a massive fallacy, and there's so much, it's much more, unfortunately, complicated than that. But if we relate it to the money thing as well, it's like money only brings happiness up to a certain point, and then it has nothing to do with your well-being and how you feel about life and stuff. Just if only once I get this, then life will be good. It's like, trust me, get that, and you'll see that you're still feeling the same.
But it's like that whole thing of it's the endless chasing the carrot thing of
Always chasing the carrot.
Or I think the other analogy is there's always a bigger mountain.
Yeah, there is.
And it's and I say this as well, and I know myself, it's a hard thing to listen to, because I myself have got that voice in my head of like, oh, if I could do this, then that would be good, and I'd feel a lot better about this. But then there'd always be something going wrong. No one's ever, as we've said several times in this podcast, no one's ever got it fully together. No one's gone, everything's great, nothing's going wrong, this is all good. And if it is, it's a very short-lived thing, because something will very quickly go wrong. It's so true. So true. But I think it's a hard mindset to adopt. And I say that as someone that still battles with that of like, oh, if I could earn X amount of money, or if I could do this every day, I'd be happy.
Yeah.
It's a hard mindset to get out of, because then also it's that whole thing of, I think one of the things I've had flagged to me in therapy is I don't do things without a goal. So there's always a goal involved. And that's another, that comes into this. It's like everyone does normally, people will do stuff with a goal in mind, whether that be, I want to get to this position with work, or I'm going to go to the gym because I want X. Or I want to lose X amount of weight. And there's nothing wrong with having a goal, but there is something to be said to just be. As you said earlier, just be. You're okay to be. And I think it's a hard skill to master.
Completely. It is, honestly. And I do say it lightly. Like, I don't just say, you need to have this mindset. It's taken me the best part of 5 years to adopt this kind of mindset. And so it's a lifelong journey as well. But I always say it's probably the hardest, but the best journey you'll ever go on, because future you will love you for it, and it just does so many wonders for your life. But it's not an easy one. So, be prepared, but know that you can get there.
100%. And of course, as we always do, we will link all of Will's stuff below if you want to reach out for any of his services. But thank you so much for coming on, Will. It's been a really good conversation, and also quite a good conversation as well, because a lot of the stuff I think impacts everyone, but also me included. So thank you so much again for coming on and giving us your time.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I had a really good chat. Cheers, Charlie.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Not Quite Podcast. Please make sure you follow us on TikTok and Instagram to get regular updates about the podcast. These my dollars, they get hurt.